Before we dive in, hit subscribe and help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support keeps these stories alive. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, maybe Chicago, Nashville, or New Orleans. I'm always glad to see how far these videos travel. The sun sagged low over the western horizon, spilling molten gold across the dust-choked street. The light clung to the warped planks of the old saloon, to the shuttered windows that watched like unblinking eyes, to the figure pressed weakly against its wall. She stood there as though her bones were splintered timber, her dark hair tangled with grit and sweat, her gown, a once elegant red with white flowers, ripped and soiled. One hand clutched her ribs, stained dark, the other dragged against the wood for balance. Her breath trembled out like a prayer already broken. "No more pain," she whispered to no one, voice scarcely stronger than the wind. "My ribs are already broken." The town heard her, though no one drew near. Curtains shifted, eyes gleamed from shadowed porches, but no hand reached forward. She had become a story long before she staggered here, whispers of betrayal, of shame, of sins never named yet eagerly painted on her back. In a place where reputation held more weight than truth, she was easier to condemn than to understand. When she knocked faintly against the door of the apothecary, it shut before her knuckles could fall again. At the well, a woman drew up her bucket and turned away, water spilling on the ground rather than into another's cup. Each refusal pressed heavier against her chest than the cracked bones beneath. Boot steps cut through the silence, steady, unhurried, as though they had been walking forever and would walk long after the world was gone. A man approached along the dirt road, tall in the burnished light, shoulders squared beneath a worn leather jacket. His hat brim shadowed a face carved by sun and distance, lines deepened by years of solitude. Elias Boone. His name carried through the west like a low wind, neither loved nor hated, merely known as the cowboy who belonged nowhere. He might have passed as he always did, a figure moving between towns without leaving prints behind. But his stride slowed, his gaze caught by the woman crumpled against the wall. The crowd watched with hunger, waiting for him to turn his face and walk on. That was the order of things. A man did not tether himself to trouble, not if he wished to remain unscarred. Yet Elias stopped, boots planted in the dust. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and unbearable. She lifted her eyes to him, eyes rimmed red but still fierce, defiance flickering beneath exhaustion. He saw not the scandal painted on her by other tongues, but the quiet endurance of someone still refusing to fall. He lowered himself to one knee, the leather of his coat whispering against the ground. His hand, broad and roughened from years on the reins, hovered before resting gently against her arm. She flinched at first, then stilled, as if shocked that anyone would dare touch her without scorn. Their eyes locked, his dark with shame and fury, his steady, unreadable, yet softer than rumor ever claimed. Nothing was said. None needed to be. Mabel Crow, the widow with the sharpest tongue in the county, leaned from a porch and spat. "Leave her, Boone. That one's cursed." Others murmured agreement, their voices rising like flies over a wound. Elias didn't answer them. He simply slid his arm beneath the woman's shoulders and lifted her as though she weighed no more than a child. She gasped, biting down on pain, but did not protest further. The whispers swelled, brittle and venomous, yet his silence drowned them all. The long road stretched ahead, out toward the prairie's edge where the sky met emptiness. He carried her into it, boots sinking soft into the dust, her torn gown trailing like a wounded banner. The town remained behind, their judgments nailed in place like shutters that would never open again. Step by step, he bore her away from their gaze, choosing exile in a single gesture. At his cabin, a weathered structure crouched against the sea of grass, Elias set her upon a cot and fetched water from a tin basin. She tried to push him away, pride stinging sharper than her wounds, but her strength faltered. He said nothing, only offered the cup, the cool rim pressing against her lips until she drank. The water trembled down her throat, each swallow loosening the knot of despair lodged within her. He tended her ribs with careful hands, movements deliberate, as though he feared any sudden motion might scatter her entirely. She closed her eyes, whispering again, "You should have left me." His only answer was the soft scrape of a chair drawn beside the cot. He sat, hat in his lap, gaze fixed on the flickering shadows the lantern cast upon her face. The prairie wind drifted through the open window, carrying the faint hush of nightfall. Outside, the world would judge. Inside, two souls sat together in silence, bound not by words but by the fragile recognition of shared loneliness. And as darkness gathered, one thing became certain. By taking her in, Elias Boone had chosen to stand against the whole West. The night closed around them, heavy with both peril and promise, leaving their fate balanced on the edge of dawn. By morning, the prairie had already carried the tale back to town. Elias Boone had taken her in. Coffee cups rattled on porch rails, spades clicked in doorways, and the whispers carried with them the fever of scandal. A lonely cowboy, silent as stone, had chosen to shelter a woman marked by disgrace. The story spread faster than wildfire in summer grass, stoked by Mabel Crow's sharp tongue. She'll curse his land. She hissed to anyone who'd listen. First his cattle, then his soul. By midday, even Sheriff Callahan rode out to Boone's cabin, his badge gleaming with authority, his face dark with warning. "You know what she brings, Boone," Callahan said, reining in his horse at the edge of the porch. "The town won't stand for it. Don't make her shame your cross to carry." Elias stood in the doorway, unarmed but unmoved, his silence an answer Callahan could not twist. After a long pause, the sheriff spat into the dote and rode back, leaving only dust and a threat unspoken. Inside the cabin, Isolde's heart felt the weight of that warning press against her already broken ribs. She moved with caution, sweeping the floor, folding what little laundry there was, forcing her hands to be useful, so her body would not feel so weak. Elias never asked it of her, yet she did it, as if afraid that if she gave nothing, he would see her the way the town did, a burden to be cast aside. He watched her sometimes from the doorway, his face unreadable, but his eyes softer than she deserved. The days stretched taut with tension. Whenever Elias rode into town for supplies, the air grew thick with scorn. Men spat in the dote at his boots. Women crossed the street rather than brush his shadow. Still, he gathered what he needed and returned to the cabin where her quiet presence awaited. Their words were few, their gestures small, a cup of water set by her hand, the brush of her sleeve against his as they moved in the narrow room, but each act stitched something invisible between them. One evening, while the prairie bled itself into twilight, the first torch appeared on the horizon. Then another. The glow of fire swelled until a dozen men and women stood in the dote beyond the cabin, faces hard, voices raised. Mabel Crow shouted above them all, venom wrapped in righteousness. Send her out, Boone. She's brought nothing but rot to this town. You'll sink with her if you don't let her go. Isolde stood in the doorway, her body trembling against the frame. Pain radiated through her chest, but fear pressed sharper still. She leaned close to Elias, her voice barely air. "No more pain," she whispered, repeating the words that had fallen from her lips the night he found her. "No more." Elias stepped forward, revolver heavy at his hip, though he did not draw it. He faced the mob, their torches flickering wild against the darkening sky. His silence was a shield, more defiant than any shouted defense. His hand reached back without looking, and Hayes found it. He pulled her gently to his side, letting the crowd see what he had chosen, not a weapon, not anger, but her. The mob shifted uneasily. Their fury was loud, yet his quiet act rang louder still. One by one, their gazes faltered, their grip on the torches loosening. The fire's glow dimmed as doubt spread through them like smoke. Yet Sheriff Callahan was not so easily shaken. He pushed forward, hand at his pistol, jaw clenched tight. "This ends now," the sheriff growled, his voice slicing through the restless crowd. "You stand against the law, Boone. Against your own kind." The night held its breath. Elias did not reach for his gun. He stood as still as stone, his eyes fixed on the sheriff's. Then, before fear could claim her, Isolde stepped forward. Her voice, though ragged and thin, carried with startling clarity. "You call me cursed. You call me weak. But I have survived more cruelty than any of you could bear. And if that makes me unworthy in your eyes, so be it. I will not bend for your mercy, nor break for your hatred." Her words struck deeper than any bullet. For a long moment, no one moved. Callahan's hand twitched at his holster, then stilled. The torches sputtered in the wind. At last, one man turned away, then another, until the mob dissolved back into the dark prairie, leaving only the sheriff glowering in their wake. Isolde's strength faltered, and she leaned against Elias, who guided her gently inside. The door shut behind them, muting the world's condemnation. Their hands remained entwined, not in a lover's clasp, but in solidarity forged in fire and silence. Outside, the prairie wind carried the remnants of judgment into the night. Inside, two souls remained, battered, unclaimed, yet no longer alone. And as the lantern burned low, the question lingered like smoke in the rafters: what would the dawn bring to those who had chosen one another against the whole West?